Make sure. Okay, so yes, we're happy to have Liz Bennion here with us tonight. She's from Ontariogreen, which is an environmental education. So they work with community partners to improve knowledge about environment so that people will be able to make decisions that reduce environmental harm and improve biodiversity. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and I'm going to let her kind of talk a little bit more about Ontariogreen, and then she will be presenting advocacy in action.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Hi to the people I don't know. My name, as you heard, is Liz Bennion. I've got a degree in science from the University of Toronto, but I spent most of my career as a journalist. So I was a reporter and then a newspaper editor. And I'll tell you how that weird start led me into environmental advocacy as I get into my presentation. So what I'm hoping tonight is that it can seem that the challenges we're facing are enormous. And if we've worked on issues for a long time, we can feel like we're not getting anywhere. But I'm hoping tonight will kind of be a boost to everybody because there are successes that have been had. And what I'd like to do is kind of take you through the past 20 years of my life and tell you a little bit about some of the things that I've worked on and some of the successes I've had and how we got those successes, which is the key thing. So helping other people become more effective advocates is something that I've really worked hard on. In terms of Ontariogreen, can everybody hear me okay?
Can you turn up your volume a little bit? I'm on max volume here. And I think it's just a little bit.
Okay, can everyone hear me better now?
I think it's a little better. A little more. Can you do it a bit more?
I'm not sure if the problem is here. You should be able to turn up the volume there.
Yeah, I've got it on max.
Okay, so what I'll try and do is speak really loudly. Does that help? That helps?
Yes. Yeah, that helps.
Okay, all right. I will speak really loudly. I'm just going to tell you just quickly about Ontariogreen. Ontariogreen is a registered charity. It's been around since 2012. We focus on providing environmental education in classrooms and communities. We have more than 30 presentations that I've created that are curriculum-based, and I've given them to about 90,000 students around Ontario so far. So no matter where a teacher is in their curriculum, I probably have a presentation for that. So that's, my main volunteer work. But then aside from that, I've been involved in a lot of environmental advocacy. And that's through first Oakville Green, where I was the president for several years, and most recently with Biodiversity and Climate Action Niagara, which I'll tell you more about as we go along. So the presentation tonight, Advocacy in Action, explores how citizens can organize effectively to wield power that can change things. And the power we use to get elected officials to enact stronger environmental policies. It examines the barriers that citizens face in trying to make change happen and how those barriers can be overcome using a variety of tools and tactics. So through the review of several successful citizen-led advocacy campaigns, I will demonstrate how citizens have asserted their power to defeat special interests and win victories for the public good. And I'm happy to take any questions you have during the presentation. So we'll have time at the end too, but feel free to ask your questions. Okay, so just give me a second. I'm going to share my screen. So that is me several years ago in front of Queen's Park, leading a demonstration against incinerators. All right, so when it comes to environmental policy, it's vitally important to understand that at both the local and provincial level, those who ultimately make environmental laws and policies aren't experts. They're politicians, and virtually none of whom have any expertise on the environment. So I just want to use my local council as an example. This is the picture from the previous council, just because I couldn't find a good one that's up to date, but it's basically the same. And if you'll look at, what all these people actually do for a living, None of them have an environmental background. I like my council. I think it's a pretty good council. So it's nothing against my council personally. It's just to show, as an example, that the people who end up making decisions that have really serious impacts on our environment don't have any environmental knowledge themselves, usually. In a lot of small communities too, they can't afford to have environmental experts on the staff. And so a lot of times environmental decisions get made on the basis of reports that are made for developers. And of course, they're paying the consultants to make those decisions. And so you have to question, how unbiased those decisions are. So it's really important for environmental groups and community groups to work to push for better environmental policy and practice at the municipal level. For these three reasons. That's where you can have the most influence. Local politicians are within the reach of ordinary citizens. They live in your community. They can be swayed by community pressure. I can have a coffee with my councillor, or I can have a meeting with the mayor. I can't do that with the premier or the prime minister. And the local level is really where the rubber literally meets the road for environmental protection, because the biggest threat to our environment is uncontrolled urban sprawl. That's what's destroying Ontario's prime farmland, and it's decimating its remaining natural areas. And ultimately, it's local councils that have the most control over what gets built and where. So the province has been taking greater control, but as we've learned recently, they're also starting to backtrack on some of the things that they were doing. And then the third reason why local decision-making matters is because change usually happens from the bottom up. So people press municipalities, municipalities start enacting laws, the province then follows with legislation. So there's lots of good examples of that. One example is green bins. It was local municipalities that started to collect organic material, and then eventually it made it into recycling, and improved waste practices finally made it up to the provincial level. Smoking bylaws are another good example. Pesticide bylaws, that started on the local level, and I'll talk more about that later. There are a lot of barriers for citizen advocates. So the process that are set up to make sure everything runs smoothly and to protect the status quo. And also, there's only so many entry points in the process for citizens to participate. And usually it's at the tail end of the process, so there's very little ability to affect the outcome. Also, usually citizens don't have the same kind of resources or organization that our opponents do. So usually we rarely have an excess of people that are willing to help or financial resources. And fundraising can take a lot of time, and it can divert attention away from the main goal of advocating with decision makers. So usually our opponents are already an organized group, and they're capable of strategizing to achieve the desired outcome. And then another barrier for us is experts. So due to their resources, our opponents are usually able to call upon experts to support their position, but experts rarely align themselves with citizens groups, either because there's no resources to compensate them, or because they fear reputational harm or loss of revenue. So just for example, so many times I wish we could call a biologist to make a presentation for us, or make a delegation for us, or provide us with information, or do a study. And they can't, because they're all working for the developers. That's where their bread and butter is. And so they can't come and work for citizens groups. So it's very difficult for us to get the kind of expertise that our opponents often have. So I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the process that's usually set up is meant to defeat us. And so we have to participate in the process, whatever it is. If they say we have to, go to public meetings and write in our comments and make public delegations, we have to do all of that. But then on top of all of that, we have to create our own parallel process. And I'll give you an example of how that it works over and over again. We do it all the time, but I'll just give you one example. So I was fighting incinerators all around the province at one point in time several years ago. And there was one that was going to be built in Meaford. And the council had already endorsed it, and the citizens were really against it. And they heard that I had fought an incinerator successfully in Oakville. So they called me and they said, you know, what should we do? And I said, when are they holding the public meeting? So the incinerator proponent was going to hold a public meeting in Meaford. And I said, when are they holding the public meeting? And they said something like, you know, May 10th. And I said, okay, on May 8th, we're going to hold our own public meeting. And so I organized people who I spoke, and I organized a few other people who really knew the issues well to come and speak. That citizens group organized themselves. They had a speaker. We invited everyone in the community. It's a community of something like, I don't know, 12,000 or something. And we filled a hall with like 400 people. And we invited the council too, so they could come hear all the delegations. We did that public meeting. At the end of the public meeting, the people were about to march on the town hall with pitchforks. And that was basically the end of the incinerator. The meeting that the proponent was going to hold 2 days later never happened. And the council decided not to endorse the incinerator. So that's an example of where we created our own process that subverted the process that was in place that, you know, would have allowed the incinerator to be built. You know, I mentioned before, a lot of times by the time you go through the process that's been set up, you're just being told what's going to happen. You're not really being empowered as citizens to have any effect on the outcome. And so this ladder of citizen participation that was created by this professor named Arnstein, it kind of shows that. And where you get real power is when you start entering into partnerships with the people who are the decision makers. So the town will convene a committee that includes citizens, and you work together on things. What would be even better in some cases is if they allowed a citizens group to make decisions about something and then were willing to implement them. So that's sort of the higher end, but that's not usually what happens at our public processes. Usually you go into a room, there's a bunch of displays set up, you get to walk around and talk to individual people in front of individual displays, and you might get to write in your comments. And that's about as far as our public participation process goes. So it's really important that we find ways to make our own processes that give citizens power and give citizens information. So effective advocacy is all about gaining and using power. And power is built by effectively organizing your group, being really clear about your purpose and goals and how decisions are going to be made, and even more important, who's going to speak for your group. So the way we've always arranged things is that any of our group members can say anything they want to say about anything they want to say, but they can only speak on their own behalf. The group itself has very limited numbers of people who can speak for it, usually just only one or two, because you want your messages to be clear. And then you also have to decide how you're going to resolve conflicts if you have conflicts in the group, because you have to have a single united message and course of action. To build your group, you draw people to your cause and you empower them to take action. You have to become an expert on whatever the issue is, and you have to be willing to defend your position. So that means being able to come at this through facts and through research. You have to be able to share what information you get with others and encourage them to share it, to grow your group and to grow the information that's out there so people will take action. And you need to be able to demonstrate that voters will trust you and follow you. That's where you gain your power. It's because you have people behind you. So my husband very rarely was ever around when he was working. So he was not around while I was doing my thing. And then when he wasn't,
Hello, Liz. Are you there?
I think Liz, where is Liz? I think she froze for a minute there.
Well, her phone seemed to be ringing, and I wonder if somebody has interrupted her feed.
Yeah,
somehow.
maybe. Okay, let's just wait a minute. I'm gonna see. I know, that's what
Hello.
Hello.
Got disconnected there for a minute.
Yeah. Can you hear okay though?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. And then
Welcome back, Liz.
Oh, she's in and out. There she is.
I have to slip in and I have to slip back out because the meeting.
Okay, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah,
Want
no
to be
problem.
at both spots.
You can't be two spots at the same time.
I'm asking it to share, but it's not sharing.
Oh. Oh, hold on. No, you're still the co-host, so you should be good.
It says I'm screen sharing, but it's actually not allowing me to share anything. It's just showing me a blank screen. I can't reach my presentation.
It said end of slideshow or something.
It did say that. You have to go back to the beginning. It said it did say end of slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do here.
See it now.
You're back at the beginning. It's going.
Yeah.
You can see it because it's not showing it to me.
We can see all your slide. Yeah. So if you just put it, can you go to slideshow?
Are you seeing the first slide now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let me go back to where we were. That was bizarre. Okay. So let me, so the last thing I was saying was about how my husband said all the counselors sat up straighter when I got up to speak. And they did that, not because it was me, but because they knew that I had hundreds of people behind me. They knew that I was the voice of a very powerful citizens organization that had been built that could affect elections. And in fact, in Oakville, as Cheryl can probably tell you, we affected 2 elections to take us from a very pro-development, not listening to citizens council to a council that was listening to citizens and that put the reins on some of the development. So it took a couple of election cycles for that, but we were able to wield enough power that we made a difference in the elections. All right, so how I got involved in advocacy. So back in 2003, while I was still a newspaper editor, I started getting letters and phone calls about trees being cut down in parks and ravines and they weren't being replanted. And so when I called the town and said, why aren't you replanting? They said, well, we don't have enough money to do that. And I hung up the phone and I thought, well, that's something I can do something about. So I called 6 of my friends and I said, how'd you like to start a tree planting group with me? And they said, okay. And then I called Evergreen, which owns Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto now. But at the time, they were helping communities do community tree plantings. And I said, I know I'm supposed to be planting native trees. I don't really know that much about it. I just know that. So I need your expertise. And I also need you to try and find some funding for me so I can buy the trees. And then I'm going to convince the town to let me plant on public land. And would you help me with that? And Evergreen said yes. And then I called the town and I told them, look, I have these volunteers who will help me plant trees. Evergreen's going to supply me with some funding and some expertise. All I need you to do is say, yes, I can plant on some public land. And it took them 3 weeks, which I thought was forever because this was such a good idea. They should have said yes right away. Now I realize that 3 weeks was pretty darn quick. And they said yes. And that started a community tree planting program where we planted 17,000 native trees and shrubs over a 10-year period.
Oh, that's nice.
All on public land. And so that beginning into the tree planting started a lot of different programs, which I'll talk a little bit about, but it taught me a lot of things. And so one of the things we learned is you can't just have a good idea, you have to have a plan. And that includes a strategy to engage decision makers and to engage people. So when I called the town, I didn't just say I had a good idea. I called them and said, I have friends who will help me. I have expertise in funding, and I know where I want to plant. I know where I want to do the first planting. So I had a plan in place. And if you want to engage people, you have to tap into their concerns about what's wrong in a concise and easy to understand way. And you have to be able to help them imagine what can be done instead, and then give them something useful to do, making it as simple as possible for them to do it. So people only had to show up. We provided shovels and gloves. We only had them there for 2 hours, so people didn't have to make a big commitment. They knew if they came at 10, they'd be done by 12, and that was it. And that really got people out. No matter how many trees we planted at any given planting, always the right number of people showed up to get it done within 2 hours. It was like magic. We also learned that while it's easy to laugh at tree huggers, it's not easy to laugh at tree planters. So doing the community work gave us the legitimacy and the currency to fight on the bigger issues and win in the battles ahead. I also learned that you need to start small, because it's a lot easier to build from success to success rather than to try and recover from failure. So whatever you're going to do in terms of advocacy, you start with something that's achievable and you build up from there. And people are eager to engage in meaningful activities to help the environment. You just have to make it easy for them. And this is a really, really important point. Whatever you're involved in, any kind of advocacy, community work, you need to look at whether what you did was successful or not. Did it achieve your goals, or did it move you closer to your goals? If it didn't, stop doing it. Do something else, anything else, try something new. But too often we get stuck. We think we have a good idea, we try it, it doesn't work, and then we just try harder and it still doesn't work. So it's what we used to call in the newspaper business doing a post-mortem. After every activity we did a post-mortem to decide whether it was effective or not. If it was effective, we did more of it. If it wasn't effective, we dropped it and did something else. So you constantly reevaluate and revise your strategies and tactics. And you always know when you're successful when everyone takes credit for it. So when the town started taking credit for all tree planting activities, we knew that we had successes. One of the things we learned during the whole tree activity is that a picture can be worth 1,000 words. So once we got started on all these tree planting activities, I started realizing I couldn't plant trees fast enough to make up for the trees the developers were taking down. And so I realized we needed to get some tree protection bylaws put in place. And that was a big, hard fight. Everybody was against it. Nobody, the council thought, oh, people are going to complain and we don't want to hear all their complaints. And a lot of citizens said, you can't tell me what to do on my own land. And it was all that kind of stuff. And we had to overcome all of that. And one of the things that we did is we took pictures of trees being taken down. This looks like a lumber camp in Northern Ontario. This was the trees taken down off one property in South Oakville. So we actually engaged citizens when they heard the chainsaws to get out there, take pictures, show what was happening, show how many trees were being lost. So we had a lot of really good photos when we made our presentation to the town to tell them what was going on. We also did all kinds of other things. We got the community engaged by doing heritage tree hunts. So we got the community to go out there and nominate their favorite trees, and we turned it into a big thing. We had a mayor ceremony where awards were given out, and it created a lot of publicity about our urban forest and the need to protect and preserve it, and got a lot of people engaged in that issue. We also started doing urban forest tours, which I continue to do even now. So we would take people out around all these hidden little forest gems in Oakville, show them what we had there, and get people interested again in trying to preserve them and protect them. We also gathered a bunch of acorns from a 250-year-old tree that was about to be cut down and was preserved because a retired school teacher said, that's not happening on my watch, and stood up to the council, and they ended up building the road around it and preserving the tree. And then we ended up collecting a bunch of acorns. We grew them out. We sold some of them to recoup the costs of growing the seedlings out at a nursery. And then we gave a whole bunch of them away. But that whole exercise around that tree project got us a lot of attention too. And so now we had the citizens engaged, we had the council engaged, we had everybody engaged in urban forest issues. Now we could really work to get some good policy around urban forestry. So we needed to work on a private tree bylaw. And here's another example of, a picture can tell 1,000 words. So this was a beautiful elm that was thriving in a place that no tree should thrive in. It was on the corner of two busy streets, Trafalgar and Cornwall. It was surrounded by road and concrete and building and parking lot, and yet there it was thriving. And for no reason whatsoever, the doctor who owned the office building there cut that tree down. And they cut it down before we were able to collect seed from it. We were going to collect seed and send it off to Guelph, where they're trying to grow disease-resistant elms, but we didn't get the opportunity to. But that picture just shows what a difference a single tree can make, and what a big loss it is when it's gone. So some of the lessons we learned over trying to get this private tree bylaw in place is groups need to find a way to gain power and credibility through community support and human connections to decision makers. We also found you can often win environmental battles over economic concerns. I don't really care what arguments we have to make to win the battle as long as we win. And if economic arguments are what will win you the battle, then use them. So our research, for instance, on the impact of neighborhood tree loss on property values got some people who were living in very expensive houses in South Oakville to start getting concerned about what was happening with all this redevelopment in their area, where small homes on large lots were losing all their trees, and then giant homes from property line to property line were being built with no room to replant. And so we started winning some people over, or at least stopped them from being opposed to a private tree bylaw. We also learned that there's people you're never going to convince, so we have to stop trying. We need to talk more to the people who are in what I call the mushy middle. So we spend a lot of time talking to our friends, a lot of time trying to convince people who are never going to be won over. We need to concentrate all our time on the people who can be moved in the middle. You need to find simple, effective ways to explain things, and images help. And you have to be prepared for the long run. It takes a long time to make change, a lot longer than it should, and you have to be willing to stick with it. And the one thing we really found when we started working on urban forest issues is that if you find one bad policy, just follow the trail and you'll find a million others that need to be changed. So once we got going down that road of fixing bad policies, we found all kinds of things. And what we got changed was this. We got the town to agree to naturalize 25% of its parks. So instead of a lot of mowed lawns, we got native plants, trees, shrubs, all kinds of things planted. We got probably what was the best private tree bylaw in the province. And I still hold it up as an example to other communities who are looking to do some kind of tree protection bylaw. We got a community-wide urban forest plan that had a goal to increase tree canopy to 40% by 2050. So the town made a commitment to that goal, and they used the information from the private tree bylaw to figure out how many trees were being lost, because until you put a private tree bylaw in place, you have no way of knowing that. You have no way of knowing how many trees are being cut. So it actually becomes a data collection device that municipalities can use to figure out how many trees they're losing, so they know how many trees have to be planted to make up for the loss and to get to whatever goal they've set for themselves. And we also got developers, policies in place for developers to put soil back on development land, because as we know, they come in and the first thing they do is they scrape off all the topsoil. Then they run their heavy equipment over the soil that's left, which is subsoil, and then it's all compacted because of the weight of the equipment. And then they build the houses, and then people come along to plant trees, and you have no topsoil, and you're trying to plant them in compacted subsoil, which is no place for a tree to grow. And so you're never going to get a healthy tree canopy in those conditions. And so making the developers put the topsoil back that they took away really helps.
Can I interrupt you for a quick question?
Sure.
The tree planting up to 2050, the 40% of planting trees by 2050 is the goal, right? And
the goal was to have 40% of the area covered by tree canopy by 2050.
And okay, not 2030, you switched it to 2050?
No, so in Oakville, they had 29% tree canopy cover. They did a study. So about 29% of the entire area was shaded by trees, basically. And Environment Canada says you need an absolute minimum of 30%. We have nowhere near that in Niagara, by the way. It's 17.5% here in Niagara, and we're losing more every day. So
what's the purpose of that, especially now that they're building, because they built so much on that farmland and just took so many trees out? What is the purpose of the trees? What's behind all these trees, and why is it so important to get these trees out? Does it have anything to do with radiation and the putting the oxygen back in, because you got so much oxygen coming from trees?
Yeah, so it's the multiple benefits that trees provide. In terms of biodiversity, you need the trees to support everything from the insects all the way up the food chain to basically us. You need it for the oxygen benefits they provide. You need it for the water cleaning services and the flood prevention that they provide. There's just a multitude of reasons why you need at least 30% tree canopy cover to have a healthy environment.
Okay, I understand, because I had a feeling that was the direction of reason, but I just wanted to clarify it.
Yeah. All right, so the next thing that we took on, by the way, by this time I had left the newspaper and I had started hanging out with a group that had been fighting development in Oakville called Ontariogreen. It was a citizens group. Within a year of me hanging out with that group, they'd made me the president of the group, and I was president for 7 years. So during that, we did all kinds of things, including we got the first municipal pesticide bylaw in Ontario. And it was, again, a tough fight because no municipality had one. We were the first. And the pesticide industry was very concerned about having a municipal pesticide bylaw. And they actually flew in so-called scientists from the United States to come and testify in front of our council. But we were able to get the pesticide bylaw despite all of that. We brought groups together. We were persistent. We found an ally on council. And this is important if you're doing advocacy work. If you can find an advocate among the decision makers, among your council, who will help bring your cause forward, that's important. We couldn't out-expert the experts, but we could trip them up. We did our research, and we were actually able to prove that the so-called experts from the States, these scientists, actually lied to our council. And we were able to email one of our counselors while they were testifying to prove that they had lied about something. And he was able to bring that up at council. And then that kind of made everything else they said questionable. We also learned from that municipalities can lead the way on major issues. So once Oakville brought in that pesticide bylaw, other municipalities started trying to bring in pesticide bylaws, and that prompted the province to finally bring in a pesticide bylaw. Or not bylaw, pesticide act. So another thing that we did was this little piece of property that had an old growth forest on it. And one day I saw a map where the green area was now listed as gray, which means it was going to be industrial use. I called the town and they said, oh, you know, it's kind of trapped in a place by the Ford plant and a busy road. And it doesn't really matter, but it did really matter. It was part of one of what had been 7 environmentally sensitive areas in Oakville. We'd already lost 3 of them, and the town was just going to let this one go. So we jumped into action. We organized a Mother's Day walk in Wildflower Woods. We invited the local MPP. We invited the local photography group so they could take pictures of all the wonderful things that were growing there. And so we could show people, you know, what we were about to lose. And it was an election year, so that was really great because politicians tend to pay more attention when it's an election year. And so we managed to save Wildflower Woods, and it's now a new conservation area in Oakville. We did the same thing with this other big piece of property. It's a 900-acre property called Glen Orkey. It was owned by the province. They were going to sell it off for development. Again, it was an election year. We were able to work with the MPP. We were able to get enough citizen support that we convinced them to turn it into a conservation area. So using election cycles can be a very important way of helping you get things done that you want to get done. So you use the time between elections to share information and gain citizen support for your cause and to advocate to politicians. As the election season approaches, you get your citizens more engaged and ready to take action and to press politicians on their stand. And as the election nears, you make politicians' views public and you encourage your supporters to get active with campaigns and on social media. So most politicians want to get reelected, so this is the very best time to get their support. And then, of course, you have to get out and vote. And after the election, you have to hold politicians' feet to the fire. So if they've agreed to do something, you have to make sure that they do it. And then you start the whole cycle over again. I'm going to have to cut a lot of things short because I know we only have a limited amount of time. So I will just tell you that with the incinerator battle, I heard that there was an incinerator that they wanted to build in Oakville, between Oakville and Milton. It was going to cost $800 million. And incinerators are bad for innumerable reasons. First of all, you have to have waste to make the incinerator run. So they don't get rid of waste, they actually require waste. So it doesn't solve the waste issue. And then incinerators just turn what mostly could be recycled or composted into emissions and ash. And the ash is highly toxic, and so is the fly ash that's trapped in the stacks. So it's just not a good thing. We started advocating against it. I was by myself at regional council because at that time there were no groups in Burlington, there were no groups in Milton. So I actually had to go out and create groups in those two communities. I did that by calling everybody I knew who were in those communities, finding people who were concerned about the environment, got them up and running as their own organizations. So when I went to regional council, it was not just me, it was people from all the other communities as well, and the politicians couldn't afford to ignore us. It was also an election year, the year before this decision was made. And so we actually ran a candidate who had no chance of getting elected as regional chair, but he was really, he was a businessman, really good with numbers, and he was able to prove to the public what a bad idea this was from an economic perspective. And the guy who was the leading contender to be chair didn't have an opinion on the incinerator one way or the other at the beginning, but he saw how effective our candidate was in convincing citizens that this was a bad idea economically. And he ended up saying that he would not support it if he got elected. He did get elected, and we held his feet to the fire on that. So we defeated the incinerator, and we got the region to concentrate on green bins and reducing waste instead. So after that, I went running around the province because at the time there was all kinds of incinerator proponents going to mostly small communities and trying to get them to build incinerators. And I helped communities sort of all around Ontario and even some places in the States, even in Newfoundland, defeat incinerator proposals. So the process is meant to defeat you. We had to organize our own events and our own process to try and ensure these things weren't built. I had to create allies. We had to take advantage of the election cycle. We did lots of research, but the main thing was getting people out and getting people active. As I mentioned before, time talking to people who agree with us and people who don't agree with us and won't ever agree with us. And we need to spend all our time on the mushy middle. So if you think of this as a teeter-totter, you always have people who are never going to agree with you, people who already agree with you, and then there's people in the middle. And if you can move some of those people who maybe are against it but just don't have enough information, if you can give them some information to neutralize them, then that helps tip the teeter-totter. If you can get some people who agree with you but have never been active to start taking some action, that can help the teeter-totter. And before you know it, the teeter-totter tips, and now you've got what you wanted. I also ran around the province doing these Organized to Win seminars, because I realized that it wasn't that people didn't have information, they didn't know how to advocate effectively. So they knew how to do research and they had all the facts and figures, but they didn't know how to use that information then to get what they want. And so I probably did, I don't know, maybe 30 Organized to Win seminars all around the province. And I was so gratified to see those local groups have their own successes. Public demonstrations are sometimes necessary and effective. They get good media coverage oftentimes, and they can draw people to your cause, and they can spread more information about your cause, but they are not super effective at changing policy. You have to do more than just demonstrate if you want policy to change. Advocacy, as I mentioned before, takes time. The little group that was formed in Oakville, Ontariogreen, that was formed by 4 citizens, and it was to fight a development proposal in North Oakville. They wanted to have proper environmental assessments done on the land, and they wanted to create what became the province's first natural heritage system, where the most environmentally sensitive areas were preserved, buffers were put around them, and then they were linked together into a natural heritage system. So that's what that group was originally fighting for, but it took 8 years. It took 8 years from the time the citizens group first formed until a bunch of developers took the town to the Ontario Municipal Board to fight against the natural heritage system, until the municipal board ruled in the town and the citizens' favor. So you have to be prepared for the long run, is the bottom line. Another advocacy effort I was involved in was protecting the habitat for the trumpeter swans in LaSalle Park in Burlington. Marina wanted to build an expansion of their marina. They wanted to double the size of it, and they wanted to build a permanent rock break wall that would have covered most of the harbor of that marina. Trumpeter swans are a swan that is native only to North America. It's the largest swan in the world, and it was almost made extinct. At one point in time, they thought there were only 69 of these birds left in all of North America. And they were only brought back to Ontario in the 1980s by a scientist who was able to get eggs from an Alaskan flock and volunteers to help raise them. So today we have 2,000 about trumpeter swans in Ontario. So it's an amazing story of conservation success. But it was being threatened by this development because about 1/4 to 1/5 of the entire trumpeter swan population comes to LaSalle Park in Burlington for the winter. So we did a whole bunch of things. We made an appeal to the provincial government, which bought us a bunch of time. And the minister put a bunch of stipulations that made it more difficult for the marina to go ahead with their plan. We proved that the finances that the Marina Association were saying that they had were not true. We were able to make a good business case against this happening. We started holding family day events, trumpeter events at LaSalle Park to get citizens engaged. We did, I don't know how many times I was in front of Burlington Council, a lot. And we did a door-to-door campaign. We got information brochures out there. And the bottom line is we won. So there was no expansion of the marina. There was no permanent break wall. We got proper signage installed, and the trumpeter swan group can go and feed the birds in the winter if it's an excessively cold winter and the water freezes over for an extensive period of time. I'm not going to go too much about a better Niagara, but the bottom line was, as many of you may remember, back in 2018, we had a very difficult election where we had a bunch of people on regional council who a lot of citizens found were not doing what they should. And so we got involved in that through a Better Niagara. We held training sessions for candidates. It was open to all candidates. We just trained people up to run for election. We developed a strategy for endorsing candidates based on some criteria. We did a personal interview with everybody that we were going to endorse. We did a resume review, and we had them sign a social contract about how they would behave as elected officials to their constituents. We registered as third-party advertisers in all 12 municipalities, and we raised and spent $23,000 to advocate for some councillors, some people to be elected, and against the ones that we wanted to get out of office. And in the end, we really targeted 11 members of regional council, and 9 lost their seats. So we learned you can beat City Hall, and sometimes the region and the Conservation Authority, and you just have to be determined and stick with it. I won't, we don't have time for that, but it's just some of the things that we did. So Biodiversity and Climate Action Niagara is a group that started about 4 years ago. And it was because I realized we had a lot of local groups in Niagara who were all concerned about environmental things, but they weren't working together. They were all working on their own individual issues. And because they weren't working together, they didn't have power. There is strength in numbers. And so what we did was we all came together as a collective. The individual groups still do their individual things, but we speak with one voice on things that matter. And the first thing that we decided to go after was the region was creating its new official plan back in 2022. And as part of that, they were going to create the first natural heritage system in Niagara. And we wanted them to choose the best of 3 options. There was a lot of resistance to that, both from some councillors and from some planning staff. And so we really had to make the case, and we organized delegates. We did a lot of social media. We got people writing their councillors and talking to their councillors. And in the end, we got a unanimous decision from the councillors who were there. Not all councillors were present, but a unanimous decision from the councillors to adopt the best option for the natural heritage system. I won't get into this because we don't have time for this either. And most recently, what we took on was the province had proposed to build allow to build a new gas plant in the city of Thorold. This is taking us backwards. We should be going towards green energy, not building more polluting fossil fuel-based electrical generation. We should be making deals with Quebec for its clean energy rather than spending millions and millions of dollars on these gas plants. And so we helped organize citizens. There was a real champion in Thorold, a citizen named Mark Freeman, who arose and said he was willing to take this on. So I helped him. There's a group called 50 by 30, which is one of the many new groups that have come up since Biodiversity and Climate Action started. And they took a big role in this too, helping to organize citizens. And the bottom line is, we convinced the councils to say no to the gas plant. So that just happened a couple of months ago. And now we're reaching out to other groups around the province who are also fighting these gas plant plans in their community to help them. Of course, Biodiversity and Climate Action really took on the Greenbelt campaign. So we organized, 7 rallies that were all really well attended. Way more than just that. As I said, demonstrations aren't enough to change policy. We wrote letters to the federal government asking them to do everything that they could, every lever of power that they could use to try and stop this. And part of what they did was they had that study they were going to do on the impact on the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve of having development around it. We wrote to all the conservative MPPs and gave them our opinion on what was going on. And we also talked to the opposition parties. We met with the leader of the NDP. We met with the environment critic for the NDP. We, oh my goodness, we did so many things. We were the sign captains for the Niagara region, getting out the signs. And we all know what happened there. In the end, with the help of the Auditor General and all the groups around and the Integrity Commissioner, the Ford government reversed its plans on the Greenbelt. And most recently, they just announced they're reversing their municipal boundary expansions. As well, we joined with a big group. I was a founding member of something called the Alliance for Livable Ontario that is bringing together stakeholders from all sectors, from agriculture, urban planning, the environment, affordable housing, tenants associations, neighborhood associations, healthcare, labor, academia, businesses, and indigenous nations to come together to speak with one voice on building a really livable Ontario. So, you know, we've spent a lot of time growing our group because growing our group gives us more power. So our first letter to council in August of 2020 was signed by 7 groups and 7 individuals. Our most recent letter in September of 2022 was signed by 22 groups and 100 individuals. So we're constantly growing our group and growing our power. And when you become a recognized authority on issues, then you have a lot more influence. And so one of the effects of us writing to the federal government, just as an example, was when Guilbeault announced the study on the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Reserve. I was one of the few citizens that was invited to that press conference. So we knew that our letter to the federal government mattered. So what it takes to be successful is being organized, being persistent, developing strategies, doing postmortems, developing effective communication, making financial arguments on these environmental issues, because usually if it's bad for the environment, it's bad for a whole lot of reasons. Creating activities, events, and presentations that give you legitimacy with the public, and using election cycles to your advantage. Building bridges with decision makers and finding advocates among the decision makers for your causes is important. And then build your groups. And also celebrate every little victory, because this is hard work. It takes a long time and a lot of effort, and we need to celebrate when we can. Don't give up. Change only happens when people demand it. And now I'm finally going to stop talking. Thank you for your patience. And any questions you have, I'd be happy to take.
Any questions here?
There's lots of good information.
Lots of good information, yes.
Thank you, Liz.
Any questions from anybody online?
So what's happening now, Liz? What's the new action?
There's so many things. So I'm working at a lot of different levels. So I'm working at the provincial level with the big groups like environmental defense, and there's all kinds of things going on there, trying to stop the building of the 413 highway to nowhere, that big new highway they want to push north of the 407 that's going to cost, you know, $8 billion. I think we could find a better use of $8 billion, maybe healthcare, maybe education, maybe long-term care, maybe, you know, there's a lot of things we could do besides building a road to nowhere. That the developers own the land all beside it, so we know why they're doing it. So we're working on that, but I'm also working down at local municipal levels on trying to get good tree policies and good urban forest policies in place. So we're talking to towns like Fort Erie. I'm going to be on a citizens group committee organized by the town here in my town of Lincoln. We've given presentations to the city of Welland. So there's little local things as well. On the sort of regional level, one of the things we'd like to see as a region to adopt a really good climate change mitigation strategy that involves, you know, how do we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings and from our transportation sector, which are the 2 biggest emitters in the municipal level. So getting ready for climate change and trying to reduce our impact, that's another big thing we're working on.
Liz, you might want to talk a bit about the 4 EROs that are being proposed in terms of hazardous waste disposal and so forth. And that ends the period for comment ends at the end of the month.
Right. So the province is proposing some legislation that would change how water is used by several different industries, including the waste industry, just as an example. And I was at a seminar recently where an environmental lawyer said, this is the most dangerous set of legislation that she has ever seen in 3 decades of work. I can't give you too many specifics on it just because we don't have time, but I will be writing a response to the upcoming, the proposed legislation. So if anyone would like to sign on to that letter that we're creating, you're welcome to email me. And I should give you our email. So it's bcacniagara@gmail.com. bcacniagara@gmail.com. So the ERO is the Environmental Registry of Ontario, and you can go to the Environmental Registry of Ontario and it lists all the things that are coming up, and you will see those proposals and you can comment on them. But if you want to sign on to the letter that I'll be preparing, you can just email me and I'll add you to the list.
You can actually, when you go onto the ERO, you can actually set up an account and they will send you on a weekly basis anything that is of interest in your neighborhood or your area.
Thanks for that. Are any of you involved in groups, and have you had your own battles, frustrations that have...
We don't want to talk about it.
Too long a story, Liz.
Can I ask a question, Liz?
Sure.
I was at a Pelham Path meeting on Saturday, and they were talking about the proposed extension, Merritt Road extension, which is very, very concerning to them, of course. And I know that, you know, you intend that Biodiversity and Climate Action Niagara do, you know, join them and do something on that. And I wondered if you, you know, if you were having any ideas.
Yeah, so for people who don't know what that is, so Merritt Road is it's between Thorold and Welland. And there are provincially significant wetlands and significant woodlands, both to the north and to the south of Merritt Road. Right now, Merritt Road doesn't go all the way through. It stops, and the reason it stops is because the biggest portion of a provincially significant wetland is right there. So it dead ends. But the proposal by the region is to take the little 2-lane Merritt Road, expand it to 4 lanes, which is going to take out woodlands and provincially significant wetlands. And not only that, but to extend it where it now dead ends right through the biggest portion of a major provincially significant wetland. And it's going to cost a fortune. It is very dangerous. There's already flooding problems around there, and this will take out a wetland, which is a natural way of mitigating flooding. It's going to be hugely damaging in terms of the loss of the wetland and the wetland species and the woodlands. It's just a disaster what they're proposing, and the entire space that they're going to be damaging is 35 meters across. So it's not just the 4 lanes of road, it's also bike paths, it's also walking paths. It's just massive, the amount of asphalt they're looking at putting down. So we're very concerned about it. We have written about it. If anyone's interested in learning more, I can send you the sheet that we made up about it. And yes, we will be working, not just with PATH, but working to try and convince the region not to do this. It's going to cost citizens billions. And we already heard that the region's very concerned about the amount of tax they're going to have to increase everyone. And part of that is because of the provincial government not allowing them to charge the costs of development fees that they used to charge to developers. So now we as taxpayers have to pick that up. So there's a lot of issues, but they could find better ways to spend money than building a road right through provincially significant wetlands and woodlands. Anybody else?
Yeah, can I just say one thing? How you talked about working together, groups working together. And what I've noticed is in Niagara, there's a lot of, everybody's in their own silos, climate change and you know, saving nature and trees and everything. And I'm also very interested in saving heritage buildings. And actually, heritage buildings the greenest building is the one still standing. If you're knocking them down, you've got to put it in the landfill. You've got to, you know, manufacture new things to build the new building that's going to replace it, rather than retrofit and reuse as they do in a lot of places like Europe. But, you know, I find that the groups are not talking, like is there an overarching group already in Niagara that can kind of bring all these different groups together that really have common interests and don't realize it?
Well, I'm hoping that Biodiversity and Climate Action is that group. I mean, we have 22 groups that are part of it, and we did deal with that aspect about preserving heritage buildings as part of the way we can cut down our greenhouse gases. You know, we need to look at how we can reuse buildings, exactly what you said, instead of tearing them down and building from new. So we completely agree on that. And we'd be happy to work with you. If heritage groups would like to work with us on things, we would be happy to work with you.
Is there a place that there's a list of all of these organizations?
Sorry, is there a what?
A list of all of these organizations? You're running off the Alliance for a Livable Ontario, the Climate Action Niagara, the Biodiversity Action Group. Is there a list of all these groups?
It would be nice if there was one list, but there isn't. There isn't. I know at one time there were a couple of people here in Niagara who were trying to put together a list, but it involved making a website and then maintaining that website. And at the time, they had no way of doing that over the long run. That is something that we should consider doing as a group. But again, it's about funding. You know, how do you fund these things over the long term, and how do you make sure that people know about them? But I agree with you. We need to find some way of letting the public know what is out there, one comprehensive way where they can get to the things that they want to know more about.
All of us that are working on projects could all maybe post it, and you know, and
like a blog,
get people interested that way. If there was like one website where you know you could,
yeah, it's definitely something we should work on.
Okay. Any more questions?
Good presentation, thank you.
Yeah, very good presentation, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you,
I don't
Liz.
think there's anybody else online. And just on behalf of the Welland Library, I want to thank Liz for her presentation tonight. Half of the people came online and half the people came in person here, which is great. And just to let everyone know, our library is hosting the presentation on the trumpet swans with Liz. I believe it's November 4th at 2:30. So it's the same. You can come online or you can come in person, but it would be at the Seaway Mall if you come in person. So that's supposed to be an interesting presentation as well. So hopefully we'll see everybody then.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, bcacniagara@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer your questions or give you whatever information I can. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, Liz. Bye now.
Bye.
If you're not on her list, you know, this